Give it up for our last presenters. Warm welcome. Come on out, gentlemen.
So I'm Gregg Zachary, a writer on technology and a professor at Arizona State University. Jerry and I met some 20-odd years ago. Jerry wrote a book called Startup, published in 1995, about his experiences at a company called Go.
Correct.
And I myself, the year before, had published a book on the making of a software program called Showstopper. Jerry has a PhD in computer science. I have a BA in philosophy. So that's why I'm asking him some questions.
I have one of those too.
You do. No, that is true.
History and philosophy of science.
And Jerry also teaches a class on AI at Stanford University, and so he's influencing the young minds of artificial intelligence engineers and roboticists. And I just thought I'd kick it off with a question. Jerry wrote a book, a very interesting book, Humans Need Not Apply, published by Yale University Press, in which he argued that artificial intelligence and robots were a threat to employment. And I think his views are evolving, but I wanted to ask you, with all the challenges that we're facing, and having a president, a new president, who at best could be called an uninspired amateur, why should we waste our precious cycles of concern about robots and artificial intelligence? Are they really a threat that measures up to these other threats we're now facing?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good question, Greg. Let me first, though, say, this is Gregg Zachary, guys.
Oh, stop it, Jerry.
This is Gregg Zachary. I knew him, he was at the Wall Street Journal for how long?
And for about 15 years.
15 years. I used to pick it up every day and go, someday I want to meet this guy because his stuff was so insightful. That's great. And it's wonderful to be here in Portland, the last city in the U.S. where people still read books. So.
And also, Jerry and I made a brief and very disciplined visit to a place called, was it called Oregon First? Oregon Finest, a pot emporium. And we managed to...
And this is on video.
Yeah, we did not inhale. We did not inhale.
No, we just ate.
I bought a pipe, actually.
I had lunch there.
So, how fearful are you of robots?
You really want to talk about it. We're going to have so much fun here with this.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, we're the mop-up, we're the end, you know. So, folks, you know, don't forget to tip your waitress. You know, it's last call.
Don't forget to tip the waitress, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's last
Very
call,
thoughtful.
closing time.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Let's try this again. Greg, I'm very glad that you asked me that question.
Thanks, Jerry.
You know, if you look at the popular press and you watch movies, which I'm sure none of you do because you're too busy reading, you get the impression that robots are getting increasingly intelligent and that they're going to rise up potentially and revolt and take over the world. But I'm here to tell you that nothing like that is the case. You know, the topic of the talk was originally supposed to be, are robots our masters or our slaves?
Or both.
And I would say that that depends on how rich you are. Because robots are best understood not as being on some kind of mythical ladder of intelligence. They're simply the next phase of automation. And automation has been going on for hundreds of years, and the kinds of effects that robots and artificial intelligence will have over the next several decades is very much like, if you want to understand it, you can only have to do is look at the history of automation historically. Now, as Karl Marx explained, automation is the substitution of capital for labor. So I'm here to tell you he was right when he said that the struggle between capital, which is to say rich people, and labor is a losing proposition for the workers. So I think that over the next several decades, we're going to see a series of new challenges that will displace a significant groups of people who currently are in the workforce, but whose skills will be obsoleted. And we need to deal with the social fallout of that and how to ensure that they don't just starve and die as a result.
Do we need government then to step up and intervene, or civil society? How will we cope? Do we need better policies?
Well, the short answer is yes. We do need government to step up, but that doesn't mean there are different ways of stepping up. You can step up and interfere and dictate how things are done, or you can lay the right environment in which certain kinds of things can grow. But the problem we have today, in my view, is that our economic policies and goals are not aligned with our social goals and our social policies. You know, capitalism is a very powerful but a rough beast. And it needs to be domesticated. We can't just let it run wild, or very bad things will happen.
You would say the same about technologies, that technologies can't be out of control, they have to be domesticated as well?
I think technologies can cause great social harm, but obviously can do great social good. So we just need to have our heads in the game to understand that not everything is good because it's technology, but we want to get the benefits and minimize the downsides and the costs.
You've got a new book out on artificial intelligence from Oxford, and you look at the history of the past 50 years of AI. It's gone through hype and bubbles.
Yeah.
Are we in another period of hype, or are we in a period of delivering?
We are clearly in one of the cycles of hype. That is not to say that it's not a powerful technology, and it's not to say that it won't have very significant applications and uses in a wide variety of industries. But the same thing was true of relational databases. And yet, we didn't have conferences worrying about what was going to happen when relational databases started to put people out of work, which they did. It's a pretty good analogy because everybody uses relational databases today. Nobody even remembers. You and I are old enough to know what it was like before they had relational databases. They had network, hierarchical, and there was a third one that nobody, even back then we couldn't remember it. But it's a powerful technology, and I don't think that it is entirely inappropriate to think that the effects of artificial intelligence may be as powerful as the invention of the wheel. And while that sounds like, oh my God, the invention of the wheel, what did the wheel really do? It revolutionized transportation. Well, AI is definitely going to revolutionize transportation, among many, many other fields. So when I say we're in a cycle of hype, I don't mean to say that this isn't going to have real applications and real economic value and affect all of our lives. But there's hype and then there's hype. We don't need to put laws in place because we're worried that robots are going to rise up and take over. That's just complete nonsense.
Okay. Now, you are concerned about military applications of robotics and AI. Is there a specific worry you've got, or a specific concern right at the moment, or is it a longer-term worry?
Well, there are grave concerns about the use of artificial intelligence for the military, because the same advantages that artificial intelligence brings to commerce and to the rest of our lives are also applied to the military. And that may sound mild enough, but the same way you can build an autonomous vehicle whose purpose is to get you from point A to point B without a driver, you can build an autonomous tank, and you can build autonomous weapons, and you can build autonomous guns. And so those things can be so much cheaper, easier to deploy. Our reluctance to do so because of the risk that we might put our soldiers at, it's called force protection, isn't present. What are we going to do if we were, God forbid, to have a president like Donald Trump, but that could never happen? It just says, well, okay, well, we're not going to be killing people on our side because, hey, it's America first, right? We'll just send these drones in and kill everybody in a particular place. That's technically feasible at a very surprisingly low cost. But perhaps the bigger concern is not only is that possible for us to do, but it is also possible for other parties. And major new weapons systems that used to be restricted because of their cost and complexity and difficulty to what are called state actors, very soon will become available to non-state actors, I'll just put it politely. Small groups of people, you just saw a bunch of people pitching startups. You can do something like that that could be used to wipe out Christians. And I don't think that's a very good thing. So we have some very difficult times ahead that we need to pay attention to.
One last question from me before we open it up. It's the tension between technologies that augment or enhance the human, which you might think of as human-centered, and those that replace or substitute human labor, which brings us back to automation.
Yes.
Is this a spurious distinction? Can you really make a distinction between enhancement on the one hand and replacement on the other, or does it just dissolve somewhere on the continuum so that this neat dichotomy that some, as our good friend John Markoff wants to say, humans in the loop?
Right.
But is it possible to keep humans in the loop?
Well, according to my kids, I've been out of the loop for decades. But you're right. I didn't know if you were going to mention our friend by name, but yes, this is kind of his point, his way of analyzing things. But actually, since you bothered to come, let me explain something that might be of value to understand. Robots don't take people's jobs. We don't design robots to do jobs. You don't hire and fire robots. Instead, we build machines, which we can call robots if we want, to perform tasks. They're always focused on some very specific thing that needs to get done. Pack things into boxes, drive a truck, whatever it might be. Place a label on something, test to make sure the package is solid, whatever it might be. Now, if your job consists of one or more tasks which are automatable using the new technology, then indeed your job is at risk. And therefore you would say, well, what we're doing is how did he put it? We're replacing. We're using technology to replace people.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if your job consists of, let's say, 4 tasks, and we can now automate 2 of them, it's making you more productive. And it's nothing but an accelerator in making you more valuable. And you're a lawyer, you can bill more hours or whatever it is that you might do because you've been freed up from certain kinds of work. And now it's humans in the loop. It's helping people.
Yeah, and one of the tough parts is, in advance, it's often hard to tell whether this new process or digital technology will enhance you or replace you or substitute you, so it frees up. It's very hard to tell in advance. We only usually know afterwards.
Well, I would argue, again, that that's not necessarily the case if we take the gee whiz out of artificial intelligence and stop thinking us as building proto-humans. The truth is there are certain classes of work and jobs which are, I should say tasks, that are clearly automatable and many others that aren't. Now, many people in this room are technologists, and when you think of a job, you tend to think of it, technologists tend to think of it transactionally, meaning there is some well-defined goal, you're engaged in some kind of process of making something, or engaged in an exchange of some kind. There's a clear endpoint, there's a set of things that one does to get that endpoint, like programming a computer. But the truth, and those jobs are at risk. And by the way, it's not just menial labor, it's all the way up and down the spectrum. Many of the tasks that lawyers spend much of their time on, some of those tasks are now automatable, and soon you won't need them to draft contracts, standard contracts or leases, other things like that. We'll be able to do that by computer. But many, many people have different kinds of jobs. They're in jobs that really are, the essential skill is the ability to be authentic or to persuade other people or to engage in some kind of sympathetic interaction or to solve problems in domains which are highly chaotic and variable and require a certain amount of creative thinking. So, for example, nurses are not at any risk of automation anytime soon, certainly not in my lifetime, but that's not saying much. It's going to be longer for most of you. But so salespeople, nobody wants to go to a bar at the end of the day and tell their troubles to an electronic bartender.
So humans still have some big advantages over robots of the best kinds.
In the 19 seconds that thing says we have left, I will tell you that without any backup, because we don't have time, that the future, there will be plenty of work. The problem will not be that there aren't enough jobs. The problem will be that the skills which are valued by employers and by the marketplace are going to change. And whether or not the current people, perhaps could be up to half of current workers in the next 30 or 40 years, the skills that they currently have, are we going to be able to retrain them to help them stay on, participate in the economy and stay on the track toward having a good life? And that's going to be a great challenge.
A good point to invite the rest of us into the conversation. Questions for Jerry?
Anybody want to take on the champ? You can go 3 rounds. How do we do this? Do we have mics? Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, this is a very interesting topic. Like, I have a computer science background, and I have been always interested in it. Now, my question is, are we going to face an ethical and moral dilemma if artificial intelligence reaches a state where it has a conscience? Like, for example, the HBO show Westworld.
Sorry.
So AI has if an AI or a robot has a conscience, has some sort of self-awareness,
Yes.
are there different issues?
Again, this is a, I would love to back up what I'm going to say, but I'll just state it as strongly as I can. The idea that machines are not people, and they do not have any of the emotional makeup, they're not conscious. There's no evidence that they're on the path to that. That's in the movies. There is no such thing. It's nonsense if you look at what's really going on. So whether or not we imbue machines with some sense of rights or that we need to respect them is a question that we can ask in the future. But my personal opinion is no. There's no they there. They're not rising up, and they do not deserve the courtesy of our empathy any more than your dishwasher or your toaster. You know, I'm going to give it a break because it's been running all day. Now, we can build machines that can pretend, and we will, because they're very helpful in persuading the unknowledgeable to do things that are against their interests. So you will be walking down the street here, and you will see little robots outside of stores potentially going, hey, come on in. You know, if you don't come in, they're going to cut me back to half a kilowatt tonight, you know? But there's nobody there. It's just a magic show. And unfortunately, due to the 50-year history, which I wrote about in my latest book, there's been this history of magic shows in artificial intelligence to create the impression that these systems are becoming more intelligent. And oh my God, what are we going to do when they wake up like the West? How many people here have seen Westworld? Okay, so great entertainment is complete nonsense scientifically. Humans, I couldn't even watch it anymore if you've seen that series.
But you know, facts like Ashley Madison, where
That's right.
so many men seem to have believed
As you
that
know.
they were in a relation, as I know from personal experience, that they were in a relationship from a robotic software program saying things like, oh, you're very interesting. I'd like to meet you. Wouldn't we have fun together? And that seemed to be enough to have thousands of men
Pay
give
money.
a lot of embarrassing information about themselves
Yeah.
to a software bot.
There's a subsequent event that might be a little better for this company, which is that there were
My dignity is already suffering.
hundreds of thousands of fake chatbots unleashed during the recent election, primarily by foreign powers attempting to interfere with our own election, to convince people like my mother, who buys this, oh, look what this person said to me, convince them that they're real and that they have these opinions and she better get on board, and trying to persuade her. But it's purely a use of electronics to subvert the democratic process. And it's shameful, and we need to stop it.
Yeah, question Question
Anybody?
over there, or
Yes.
a question here, wherever the
Where's the mic?
microphone?
You got to turn on the mic.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry, it's a little hard for me to see with the lights. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as we kind of round the corner here and reach the winding down of the industrial age as we know it and enter into a new phase of human work, some people have predicted the sort of resurgence of the liberal arts as the essential space where human work will be done, something that involves distinction, emotion, connection. When do you think that's likely to happen? I mean, obviously there's going to be a period of suffering as automation puts 2/3 of the world out of work over the next 10 years, 20 years. But will it be 40 years? You know, will we see essentially work come back around to human connection in our lifetimes, for millennials at least, or will it be longer?
Well, this, again, it's kind of complicated. People don't really have a good grasp of how labor markets really work. If you go back 20 or 30 years, you might be surprised that 20 or 30% of the jobs that people actually did during that time now have disappeared. You know, we don't have telephone plug board operators anymore, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, I remember seeing those when I was a kid. It used to be the case that if you had a managerial position, you had another person alongside you, which is now called an administrative assistant, and where the hell are they? It's every man for himself now, as far as I can tell. So this has constantly changed. To get to your point, a lot of the work that people are doing today isn't necessarily that exciting. You know, driving cars, mowing lawns, construction work. And it's true that those jobs are going to go away. But there's plenty of other jobs that require kind of, to use the phrase you did, a liberal arts background. The ability to do critical thinking, the ability to connect with other people, the ability to persuade. Those are real, and they're just going to expand, because the good news on this is that if you go back and look at the economic history here in the United States, the average household income in the United States has doubled every 40 years for over 200 years. The average income in the United States at the time of the American Revolution, believe it or not, was $1,000 a year. And that's inflation adjusted. I'm not talking about some kind of weird old gold coins. It's the same as it is in many African countries today. That's what we were because we were an agrarian economy. And today, you guys many of you, judging from the lack of gray hair, haven't been around long enough. We actually are twice as wealthy now as we were when I was much, much younger. So when we get much wealthier, and your children will be much wealthier than you are today on average, that's the caveat, there's more money to spend. And when you have more money to spend, you hire people to do things. You may want to have custom flowers in your house, and it may be an embarrassment to you if they're not arranged by a flower arranger once a week in your house. Right now, I have 4 daughters. If they get married, they're probably going to buy a wedding dress. But 40 years from now, the average middle-class person might think, that's embarrassing. You need to have a custom gown made. When you look at the value that we are placing on things like the arts and crafts on places like Etsy, you begin to see that that can be an entire future. We can be a culture of artisans and craftsmen and performers, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't mean that work went away. It merely means that the nature of work has shifted, and we will be wealthy enough to hire and pay those people real money to do things like raise prize orchids or whatever you might be.
One last question, Jerry, and I see he's been waiting.
Okay.
I appreciate it very much. Go ahead.
The guy with the mic, yeah.
Yeah, so you've both been talking a lot about the impact of national politics on this intersection between technology and the economy and who has what jobs to do what for what prosperity. In my experience, most of the innovation we're seeing in terms of actually managing an economy is happening at the city level. It's happening with local economies. And I'm kind of curious, in your experience, have you seen any specific examples, or would you have any specific recommendations about how a local city government, let's just say it's Multnomah County or the city of Portland or the state of Oregon, What can these folks do to better impact that intersection right now and
Yeah, let me make
better
a
use
quick
of this?
quick response with Jerry's permission, which is many of these digital technologies can be treated by your local government as essential public infrastructure. Why don't you have public internet for your whole city? Why don't you have sensor networks? All these can be treated as critical infrastructure elements by your local governments, and it may be that a progressive city like Portland can create the infrastructure for smart cars and sensor networks that tell us about the environment and enhance our ability to be productive through socializing or communalizing digital technologies that for too long have been seen as only for individuals. So it's pay as you go. Everyone is their own digital sleuth. Maybe we can socialize and communalize and get leverage on the local level that way through a kind of urban approach to it.
I completely agree with that. The impediment to being smart and helping to make smart about these technologies and being able to roll them out, the real thing holding it back is ignorance. And in a place like Portland, where people read books, you have a great opportunity to take the lead on the rollout of many of these technologies, but more importantly, to do so in a way that benefits a wide swath of society and not just the rich.
Very good. Great note. Jerry Kaplan, very, very inspiring talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregg.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you.